Welcome back to the Brotherhood Ballad. I'm your co-host, Justin Romba.
And I'm your other co-host, Alex Johnson, and today we are going to be reviewing the 2024 Men's March Madness bracket up until the Elite Eight, and then we'll be giving our Final Four predictions. So moving right on into it, we're going to start with the East side of the bracket and just kind of give our review and our takeaway of the important games and kind of just our overall thoughts of everything. So I feel like it's safe for us to go ahead and skip that UConn Stetson game because, I mean, it was kind of an inevitable. They won by 39 points, so there's not really much to talk about. But those next two games on the slate, the FAU Northwestern game and the San Diego State and the UAB game, which we had both talked about as, potential upsets per se. So, Justin, what are your thoughts on those first two games of the East?
I think the FAU Northwestern game was one of the best games of the first round. I thought it would be closer than it ended up being. It was definitely closer than a 12-point victory by Northwestern. But I think inevitably, UConn, I had them winning that region. I think everybody in their West region had the right to be there, but I think UConn is just that talented. And as we get to with the Final Four predictions, I have them as winning it all, but we'll see who they go up against in my prediction. But for final thoughts for that section, UAB gave it a good fight, as a lot of the 12 seeds do with the 5 seeds, but San Diego State was just too tough of a matchup. And then FAU gave it a good fight, but Northwestern and Bowie were just too much to handle.
Yeah, that's kind of the general takeaways. And I know it was a 9 versus 8 seed game, but I didn't really feel like there was an underdog pick necessarily, and I remember watching that game actually, and I just remember that it was a good game, and I thought FAU would have a shot at kind of pulling away or taking a lead in the second half, but it kind of just never happened. And then that San Diego State UAB game, that was one of my favorite picks for the East region. I really was hoping that we could see that UAB that upset, because if I'm not mistaken, I believe however many years ago, UAB beat Iowa State in the first round when Iowa State was a 2-5 seed. I don't remember exactly, but I know that generally in the past UAB's had a pretty solid team. And then I was actually at a golf tournament during that Auburn-Yale game, and I remember pulling that up on my phone at the end of the round. Probably a majority of us who are watching this video and brackets throughout, the people who filled it out, had Auburn in this game, and just to see an Ivy League school upset such a prominent SEC team was not something that probably most of us expected to see.
Yeah, fair enough. The West region definitely had some good games, as we'll get to coming up. Might as well segue to the BYU Duquesne upset. That was one of the biggest ones of the day. Illinois Morehead State, I thought there could be some potential for that at the beginning, but Illinois and Shannon was just too much to handle. Our fellows over at Drake, Coach DeVries, just got signed with West Virginia, so I'm looking forward to that. They just weren't able to execute down at the end with Washington State, and then your Cyclones were able to make it to the Sweet 16, although Illinois was a tough challenge. But what were some of your thoughts with those final games in the West region?
Yeah, so that Illinois Morehead State game, I personally expected that game to not be close. I thought Illinois, with their number one ranked offense, I thought they wouldn't have a problem with Morehead State, and they ended up winning by 16. So that was kind of expected. And I actually heard a joke on YouTube once. It was they were predicting a potential upset, and the joke was name something you would want more of, and the joke was I want more head, and so they're we'll pick Morehead State. So anyways, and then moving on to the Drake Washington State game, man, am I disappointed in my Bulldogs. I'm not even a Drake fan, but what a choke job. DeVries looks like a JV basketball player in the second half. He looked out of place. he's making plays that we've never seen him make. He's giving away easy turnovers. It
was like 3 straight on the last 3 possessions, just turnover. We were watching it at the theater in town, and we were just confused because they played great the whole game. They had control the whole game, and then just choked it at the end.
They were up at half, and then DeVries turns into, I don't know. It was honestly disappointing. I'm not a Drake fan, but as a person from Iowa, I would have loved to see Drake pull off that upset and see that Drake-Iowa State matchup that, generally most people wanted. And so that kind of made me upset because their big man, 51 Brody, fouled out with
There was at least probably 3 minutes left.
Yeah, there was a significant chunk of the last portion of that second half where Brody's not in, and he's their best big man and arguably their only big man if we're being real. And so it's how do you expect to win when your best big man fouls out and your point guard, your starting star point guard, can't make any plays? So ultimately, they put the game into the hands of Washington State and said, do you want it or not? And Washington State, they executed. They did what they had to win. And then the Iowa State South Dakota State game, not much there to it. And then we can talk a little bit about the second round games, just briefly. The UConn Northwestern game, another game where it was no matter who they played, FAU or Northwestern, they were going to win by at least 20, and they almost won by 30. They won by 28. So there's not really much to say. Coach Hurley is a mastermind. So
I think UConn is definitely on pace to go back-to-back. I think, for me personally, not to spoil, but I think UConn, I have them winning against who. We'll find out at the end of this episode, but I think they've just been dominant, as we see in their performances against San Diego State and Illinois. They've just been dominant. They have some NBA prospects that I think could be great contributors at the next level. Dan Hurley, he's done a spectacular job. They lost a lot of their players last year to the draft, and they were able to everybody moves on up in the depth chart, and they were just able to execute. I think they've had a dominant run, and them along with the NC State Cinderella run, which we'll get to, that along with Purdue coming back after losing as the number 1 seed, those have been the main storylines. Those are pretty much the big 3 storylines.
Yeah, it was UConn never took a step back after they lost a lot of guys last year. But, there's not really much to talk about that. And then, the upset we all wanted to see was Duquesne versus Illinois. Ultimately, that wasn't going to happen. Illinois and their powerhouse offense absolutely blitzed the Duquesne defense, tore them apart. It wasn't even close. Kind of expected. I don't really have much to say other than that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then moving on to the Iowa State-Washington State game, another shot at Iowa State where their number 1 defense really came into effect because Iowa State started this game poorly. At one point early in the first half, actually, maybe the middle point of the first half, they were down by almost probably 10 to 11 points, somewhere around that range, and it was not looking promising. But Coach Alterberg is a really good head coach, and there's a reason why he's in the Final Four for Head Coaches of the Year. He deserves that accolade. And, Iowa State's defense, more importantly, their offense locked in the second half. Tamian Lipsey got hot at the right time, and Iowa State prevailed and showed why they were a 2 seed. And, they ended up coming away with a 67-56 victory. And then that Elite Eight game, it was disappointing. And as mentioned in previous videos, I'm just more a fan of pro sports than college sports, but it's nice to see Iowa teams do well in whatever sport they may be. So obviously I was rooting for Iowa State to beat Illinois. You've got the number 1 offense in Illinois in the nation versus the number 1 defense in the nation, Iowa State, going head to head. And they say defense wins championships, right? Well, defense did not win a championship that night.
Yeah, Illinois dominant offense. I just think whoever won that game was just going to lose to UConn. That's just my personal opinion.
I'd have to agree with you.
Moving on, should we move on to the next section?
Yeah, I mean, real fast are like our final takeaways from the East. Obviously, UConn was going to advance regardless. I mean, maybe it would have been closer than a 25-point game if Iowa State made it, just because they do have a really good defense. But you and I can both sit here and agree that UConn was going to come out of the East regardless. So, yeah, I think our final takeaways from the East is simply the fact that UConn is a dominant, unstoppable force. I think the statistic is they've covered the spread in every March Madness game they've played in the past 2 years. I mean, they're winning every game by 20+. And when they go head-to-head with NC State in the Final Four, I'm not going to spoil it, but you'll get our thoughts on what we think. NC State's playing Purdue.
Oh yeah.
And UConn is playing
Bama.
It's playing Alabama.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. You guys will get our final predictions, but that's it for the East. Unless Justin, you've got any other additional thoughts to add?
No, I think that'll be it. Yeah, for the East. Now on to the West region of March Madness. So. First seeded North Carolina, they took care of business as most of us thought they would. Mississippi State, Michigan State, not as close as an 8-9 game as we thought. Grand Canyon, one of the biggest upsets in the tournament over St. Mary's. I knew it's supposed to happen every year, a 12 and a 5 seed. And then Alabama took care of business as well. With those 4 teams, what were your thoughts kind of in those first and second rounds of that region?
Yeah, completely agree with you. North Carolina took care of business against Wagner. And then, I'd have to agree that 8-9 seed game, not as close as we thought. And, I can apologize for my bad words that I had against Tom Izzo and the Spartans. I had Mississippi State clearing this game. Although I wasn't wrong in the fact that Michigan State played horribly in the Big Ten regular season and in the conference, in the conference tournament. I shouldn't have doubted Tom Izzo. I know better than that. I just thought, we'd get a little change up in the bracket. But yeah, Michigan State did what they needed to, and then that 5-12 seed upset always happens. And seeing Grand Canyon, it was like a relatively new and upcoming program as a whole across all sports. It was good to see that upset. I think actually a lot of us probably had Grand Canyon winning that game. I know I personally did, and it was good to see because I don't think – did we have any other 5-12 upsets? I don't think we did.
I liked McNeese, the thought of it, but I just couldn't really commit to that. And I think out of all of them, I think we had
one,
maybe either Moorhead or Grand Canyon. We were thinking about it, but I didn't really love any of them.
Yeah,
to be honest.
Yeah, so I think that that 5-12 St. Mary's GCU game was the only 5-12 upset we had this year. But yeah, and then lastly that Alabama Charleston game. Alabama's kind of talking their talk right now in the Final Four. We'll see how they perform, which we'll get onto later. But yeah, generally those first 4 games in the West, I mean, am I surprised about those final results? Not really. I mean, obviously I wish Mississippi State would have pulled out so I didn't look like a fool talking crap about Tom Izzo. But other than that, yeah, pretty straightforward, cut and dry.
I think for me, the West region is always tough to talk about just because, Arizona really disappointed me against Clemson, as we'll get to. But we might as well get to that right now.
Yeah.
Clemson, they went on a really good run. I thought Baylor was one of the best ones in the bottom of the bracket, but Clemson went on a really surprising run. I thought they couldn't get it done against Alabama. Arizona, they played pretty well against Long Beach. They took control. I thought it was a pretty promising potential run to the Final Four. Dayton, they took care of business. Things got a little bit scary at the end of that game, but I mean
Nevada was up huge.
Yeah, Nevada in that game. I'm talking about the Dayton.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Things got a little bit scary at the end, but Dayton looked pretty good in that first round game, and then against us, they looked pretty good, but Arizona was just too tough. That Clemson game was really, really bad. Arizona had to pick the worst day in their schedule to have their worst shooting night. We were watching with the fellas. It was just not a great night for Romney, but things happen. Alabama, I think the takeaway from this region is a dominant offense. I mean, they're going against what I think is the best team in the whole March Madness against UConn. So if they can, maybe they get hot and they make an upset, but I mean, I guess we'll get to that very quickly, very soon with our predictions. But I just think the takeaway for me, Alabama just dominant. A great season from Clemson. Making it to the Elite Eight is a huge accomplishment for them in the ACC, as the ACC doesn't really get as much respect. I mean, North Carolina and Clemson, that was pretty much like and Duke, but I mean, they had kind of a disappointing end of their year. Although, I mean, these things happen. I mean, you can't always reach the Final Four, so those are my kind of thoughts for their West region.
Honestly, I expected a whole lot more out of Arizona. Caleb Love, I don't want to sit here and hurt Rami's feelings, but Caleb Love looked like an elementary basketball player, shooting 4 of 50. Not actually, but like he didn't make anything in the whole tournament. He looked like he wanted to be somewhere else. I mean, I'm not an Arizona fan, but to me it looked like the whole Arizona team was checked out from the beginning. I mean, you beat Long Beach State by 20. That's kind of expected as a 2 seed to blow out the 15 seed, unless it was last year's March Madness. But we're not talking about that. And then you beat Dayton by 10. But then you go into the Clemson game and you lose by 5. Like Caleb Love in the first half played horribly. It's like I just don't understand it. I expected so much more from Arizona. You would know more as an Arizona fan, but like. It just didn't look like they cared at all about the game. Caleb Love is throwing up contested threes. One-legged, 40 feet contested jump shots. It's just like, what are you doing?
He definitely saved us in some games at the beginning of the year. I remember, against FAU, he made some tough shots. Against Purdue, he made some tough shots. But, I mean, you really can't rely on one player as a shot chucker. I mean, we know that in intramural basketball right now, we can't really rely on shot chucking to save us out of games. I mean, we have some really talented guys on the roster, but I think with next year, I think it'll be better just because we can. Caleb Love's probably going to the NBA. We're probably going to lose a couple more players, but I think just rebuilding, we have a lot of good guys with potential on our roster. I think could make a difference, but. Just my final thoughts for the West region. I mean, really disappointing end of the year for Arizona, but at least they didn't get beat in the first round again. So, I mean, it's somewhat an improvement for Tommy Lloyd, but I think once Sean Miller was never able to get us to the Final Four, so if Tommy Lloyd can, he will be beloved in Tucson. I mean, he already is pretty well beloved by his players, and the fans, I think, are pretty favorable of him. He just needs to have more success in March, and I think he'll be a legend in Tucson.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. Is it time for Tommy Lloyd to be gone?
I think we just signed him to a new deal. I think next year he really needs to perform, hopefully to an Elite Eight or Final Four. At least the Big 12 is going to be a huge challenge if he is up to that task.
Yeah,
we'll find out. But, I mean, Big 12 is just a lot of great teams.
They're the best conference in basketball.
Kansas, Oklahoma,
West
Virginia.
Not Oklahoma anymore.
Not anymore Oklahoma, excuse me. But, I mean, they have a lot of Kansas, Iowa State. They have a lot of great basketball teams, so we're going to have everybody in line. Tommy Lloyd's going to have to light a fire under his butt and get him ready. So, I mean, we got to be prepared.
I mean, you know, the experience that I have watching Big 12 basketball, it's a fair amount because you know, like where I'm from and being a part of the Big 12, I think Coach Lloyd is going to have to light a fire under your guys' ass if you want to compete in the Big 12 because it's a different ballgame coming to the Big 12.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts on the West region?
I mean, it's kind of what I expected other than Clemson, like the Alabama-Arizona game.
North Carolina getting beat by Alabama was a bit shocking. But also, I mean, Alabama's offense has been dominant all year. So.
In totality, from the West, I'm not completely surprised how it played out in the Elite Eight. I mean, my only thoughts would have been like maybe Alabama, Arizona, or Baylor, Arizona. But overall, it played out well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, next we'll be moving on to the South. All right, hey guys, we're back. And in this segment of the podcast, we're reviewing the South region. No need to really talk about Houston-Longwood. Pretty obvious, 40-point win. That Nebraska-Texas A&M game was a bit of a shocker, honestly. You know, the experience that I have watching Fred Hoiberg at Iowa State, I really expected Nebraska to pull out in that game and beat the Aggies. I thought Hoiberg would have been too much for the Aggies, but clearly we were wrong. I think most of us were wrong, actually. And what they call him, the Asian Steph Curry, or
yeah, the Asian Curry he just wasn't showing up.
No.
I mean, he was hot, but then he just was airballing, and it's just a tough game.
Right. Nowhere to be found, and I mean, I thought Hoiberg had the game plan. Clearly not. Texas A&M, the Aggies move on in advance, and then that 5-12. Oh, we were wrong. The 5-12 game, Wisconsin lost to JMU. I remember watching that on my couch with the fellas and just thinking, I had a fair amount of money on the Badgers because, like I've stated in previous videos, I'm more of a professional sports fan, but generally I like all of Wisconsin sports, so inherently I was rooting for the Badgers to an extent. Not every night's your night, and James Madison wanted it more. They were there to play, and so you can see what happens. James Madison wins by 11 points. Did we expect that? Probably not. I'm sure a fair amount of people had that upset picked. I personally did not. The Duke and Vermont game was pretty clear cut. I think it's because McCain painted his fingernails blue and white for Duke. I think that's why they won by almost 30.
Oakland, Kentucky, we got to talk about.
Yeah, we'll definitely hit that. We should also hit the NC State Texas Tech game because
both of those upsets were huge.
Those are two huge upsets. You had the 11 versus the 14 seed squaring up in the round of 32. But yeah, I had money on NC State winning because NC State was already on a five-game win streak to win the ACC tournament championship, and we'll get to it at the end of the video. But NC State is playing cardiac Kentucky when Kemba went on an unreal run. They won the Big East, Madison Square Garden as an underdog. I think we're a 13 seed in the Big East, or they were at the bottom of the Big East.
Yeah.
And they went on an unreal tear. Won the Big East, won it all. Although, UConn ended up being a 3 seed in the actual March Madness bracket that year. NC State as an 11 seed, but I know you and I and the rest of the fellas were sweating out that game, and man, it was not good because I know all of us had our money on Oakland and was hoping we could see that game winner or that dagger from Golke, and it just never went.
Golke had made a lot of great shots in the tournament. I think he peaked definitely in the Kentucky game. That was one of the most unreal shots. And Kentucky has some great players, some great NBA prospects, but I think it was definitely hard over talent in that game. They just wanted a little bit more. NC State, DJ Burns, he's been on an unreal tear.
Zach
just
Randolph.
Dominant. Just Zach Randolph 2.0 Zebo. I mean, he's really here to play with the big boys. I mean, beating Texas Tech was a huge upset. The Red Raiders were really, formidable opponent. Oakland, they just ran out of gas. Marquette, formidable opponent. Iguodala's a pretty good NBA prospect.
And
they just didn't have enough gas to keep up with them.
Their white point guard.
Tyler Collette.
Yeah.
He's pretty solid, too. I had Marquette reaching at least the Elite Eight. I think them and Duke would have been a fine matchup, but NC State, as we saw, was that last night they beat Duke by a pretty good margin. It was never really close. They kind of just took away with.
Yeah, it was kind of close later in the first half, but generally it was, Duke had a lead an early lead, but NC State was slowly chipping away, and by halftime, it was a 2-point game. NC State had even taken a pretty marginal lead in the first half, and I think if with Jared McCain, right? If
McCain's really good.
Yeah, if McCain had maybe done 1 or 5 more TikToks in the locker room at halftime with his painted fingernails, they might have won. But I guess we'll never know. So the Wolfpack, they're gonna be a tough opponent in the Final Four, which like we said, we'll get on to later. And that Colorado-Florida upset was another one that I'm sure a lot of people had.
Every year they say that the first 4, because Colorado won the first 4 in against Boise State, every year they always move on, at least one of them.
Yeah,
so that's always one to bank on. But I mean, Marquette was just too much to handle for Colorado. Even though Cody Williams for Colorado will probably be a pretty good NBA player. He's one of their best players, but they just didn't have enough gas.
But yeah, final takeaways from the South. NC State's on a tear right now. I think they haven't lost a game in over a month is the stat.
I believe they're eight in a row now, or maybe
Yeah,
9.
something like that. They're on a tear. I like how they're playing overall. I should have hopped on the Wolfpack train before the ACC tournament started. Would have been a lot more richer. But yeah, overall, I think the South played out pretty well.
I think DJ Burns has made himself a lot of money. That's my final.
He's probably made a lot of money. I don't think he's an NBA caliber player. He can draw fouls like Edie and get stupid points at the line, and they'll just call anything. Maybe if he paints his nails red and black like McCain painted his blue and white, and does a couple TikToks here and there, they might actually be relevant. All right, guys, we're back. We're reviewing our final region of the men's 2024 March Madness bracket, and that is concluding with the Midwest before we go on and give our final predictions about the Final Four. Not much really to say about the Purdue-Grambling State game. Purdue's a powerhouse. The refs give Zach Edey anything and everything he wants. He's kind of like LeBron. The Utah State-TCU game, another pretty big blowout out of the 8-9 seed, which you and I both didn't think would happen. But, hey, Utah State, shout out Jordan Love. Go Pack. Anyways, moving forward, Gonzaga McNeese. We saw 2 out of the 5-12 game upsets with GCU beating St. Mary's and then JMU beating Wisconsin. So here, Gonzaga is, at least over the past 10, 15 years, is historically good. So I can't remember if you or I had McNeese. I know you liked McNeese, but I liked it,
but I think Gonzaga was
yeah. I think we both kind of had concluded on Gonzaga coming out with this win. And then the Kansas-Samford game. I know that I actually picked Samford, and oh my goodness, was the end of that game something else. This is why, officials in basketball especially need to be full-time, because that was a LeBron block on Iguodala at the end of you could watch a million replays, that's all ball. And that's a clear and obvious miscall. And those refs are getting paid to officiate at the highest level when it matters the most. And they're missing calls. And so, we can all sit here and bitch and moan about the refs, but, you're getting paid to officiate at the highest level of college basketball.
Just because a player falls off the rim doesn't mean they were fouled.
You can't miss that. And another problem with college basketball is there's no challenges or replays. On a monumental play,
on a foul,
on a monumental play where the game is at stake, and you can't go to the booth and replay that is a clear issue. But the bigger issue is the officiating crew missing that call. But if they're officiating a 10-year-old game, that doesn't matter. But here is there's a lot on the line, and so that is just frankly unacceptable. It's like when you had the replacement refs in the NFL. So, overall, yeah, Kansas won on the scoreboard, but look what happened when they play Gonzaga. So, justice was served. If Samford should have won, but, if Samford actually won and goes on to play Purdue, they go on to play Gonzaga, they're getting smoked just like Kansas did. But still, it's the point that call was missed, and that was a vital point in the game. I think those are the major takeaways. Samford had a big heart. They came back when they were down by 15. They came back and played really well at that second half of the game. They should have been the winners.
My thoughts for the Midwest region are pretty much it went how I pretty much thought it would go. I knew that Oregon was going to upset just because they were really hot off the Pac-12. I knew Creighton would meet Tennessee in the Sweet 16 just because Creighton, they had some great players, but Dalton Connect, I think, is a star.
Yeah.
He didn't play that great against Purdue. He was missing some shots, but I pretty much knew that Purdue was going to be dominant. I did not think Zach Edey was going to take over as much as he did, but obviously, as you mentioned, like him getting a bunch of fouls allowed him to get 40 points and 16 boards. I mean, it is what it is. When you're 7'4", you're going to get more calls than of 6'4" players. So, I mean, it pretty much went how I thought it would go. I think Purdue and NC State is going to be a battle of the bigs for all time. And then I also think Bama and UConn will be a lot of scoring. And should we just get into our picks? And do you have any other thoughts on the Midwest before we get to our Final Four prediction?
Yeah, I just think some big takeaways from the Midwest were like the poor officiating in a few of the games. And yeah, I mean, after Purdue's disaster last year, I would be lying if I said I didn't think they'd make it out of the first round this year. But it was definitely in the back of my head. I think Dalton Connect and the rest of the Volunteers had their opportunities to pull away, and they just didn't. And not every game, not every shot goes your way, but I think generally a lot of us would have loved to see Tennessee and SEC basketball pull away with that win. Zach Edey put up David Robinson numbers in the game yesterday, but if you put Zach Edey in the March Madness when David Robinson played, Zach Edey's irrelevant. They didn't call anything when David Robinson was playing college basketball. Hand checks were allowed. All the stuff that Edey's getting fouled for now was allowed when David Robinson was in college. And so Zach Edey shouldn't even get drafted. You put up 40 points, but you're constantly at the line. It's like
he missed a lot.
He shot like horrible from the free throw line. You're 7'5", like you're just a waste of height if you're shooting like 12 of 18 from the free throw line. You should be shooting 18 of 18 from the free throw line, 17 of 18. It's just if Purdue didn't have Edey, they would probably not even be in the tournament.
Fair enough.
Yeah, anyways, we don't really have our Midwest was pretty short. I thought the Oregon upset over South Carolina was pretty cool, and I know that we were all sweating out that Oregon overtime loss. Unfortunately, we all put money on Oregon, but yeah.
It happens.
Other than that, the Midwest was pretty cut and dry. We'll cut it here and go on to our Final Four picks, and that'll be it. All right, guys, we are back with our final segment of this episode, and as you can see in the previous 4 segments, we gave our takeaways on our final reviews of each region, and now we are moving on to the Final Four, where we have the matchup of UConn versus Alabama coming out of the East and the West, and then we have NC State versus Purdue coming out of the South and the Midwest. And so, Justin, reviewing that left side of the bracket first, UConn and Alabama. UConn has beat every opponent in their past however many games by 20 plus. Is that something where we can see Coach Hurley and the Huskies doing the same thing against Alabama, or do you think that the Crimson Tide have something that the nation doesn't know about and they can kind of keep it close? What are your thoughts on this game?
So for Alabama, as college basketball listeners know, Jack Sears, he's a transfer. He's a really good shooter. I think if Alabama gets hot, they can keep it close. But if, gun to my head, I'm picking UConn.
Yeah.
I think the spread could be somewhat like 6.5 or 7.5. My gut, I'm going like UConn, like 83-74. I just think that'll be too much. I think Alabama can keep it close at halftime. I think I wouldn't be surprised if it was tied or if it was a couple points UConn, but I think UConn will just pull away. I could see it being even a 10-plus victory for them. I don't think they can reach 20. I don't know if they'll be that dominant because, Alabama has made it this far.
There's a reason why they're in the Final Four.
Yeah. And then, my prediction would be UConn. I think they've been dominant all tournament. They haven't given me a reason to bet against them.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think, Coach Hurley and the Huskies, the fact that they're, UConn wins the March Madness tournament last year. Now they're playing for a shot to get right back where they were last season. There's a reason for that. The coaching is there. The team chemistry, the players, they're all like congealed as one group and they're wanting to win and they're wanting to play. generally like SEC basketball isn't like SEC basketball is all right, but so is the Big East. But UConn is just such a dominant force
They're
that
a lot more storied franchise than Bama.
right. I think UConn, they have the history, they have the fans, they have the coaching, they have it all.
I like the program that Greg Byrne is building as
Yeah.
AD. He was nice to me when he was the Arizona AD. He's building a great. I mean, when you have Saban on one side and then the Alabama basketball program that has been able to, they've gotten a lot better. I mean, they were not known, and then in 2017 they got one of the top recruits in Colin Sexton. So they're building a good program. I mean, they reached the Final Four, which is huge for that program. But I think just they'll come up just short. Obviously, that's great for their program. Reaching a Final Four is a huge accomplishment. But moving on to the NC State Purdue.
I just had one final thought before we move on, and so I'll wait to talk about the NC State Purdue game. But like NC State men and women both playing in the Final Four, and tonight as we speak, here on 4-1, we have a chance for the UConn women to join the UConn men in playing in the women's Final Four bracket. So I just think I think the whole UConn fan base, men and women's for basketball, are all one, and they just want to see both of their men's and women's teams, move forward and try to make some history. But yeah, I think it's a comfortable pick. I mean, I hate agreeing on podcasts, so for it, I'll say that Alabama wins in a 3-point really close game, even a game winner, something like that. But yeah, moving forward to the NC State Purdue game.
I think what I wanted to ask you, I didn't run this by you, but who do you think is going to score more points, Burns or Edey?
See, that answer comes solely on who are the refs going to call more fouls on. Are they going to call more fouls on NC State putting Edey at the line more, or will they call more fouls on Purdue putting Burns at the line more? So it's I know that Burns is a lot smaller than Edey.
Maybe not in weight, but
in height for sure. I think there's only a 10-pound discrepancy between the two of them. Edey's a big man, but he's not big. He's 7'4", but he's under 300 pounds. So he's a tall guy, but he's not a big dude for someone who's 7'4". And DJ Burns is a big dude. And so I think DJ Burns in the paint, trying to post up or, get a shoulder drop on somebody, I think is going to look like a more obvious foul than on Zach Edey, because you have a small forward, or you get a switch in the defense and, you have a mismatch. You have a point guard on Edey. It's going to look like someone who's 6'5" on someone who's a foot taller than you. So it's just I don't know. I think even if you exclude DJ Burns getting the line, I think NC State is just so hot that we could see an 11 seed in the championship. I mean, they're literally playing like UConn when they had Kemba.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even.
Is that who you're predicting?
Honestly, I have NC State playing in the championship. I think Purdue's run is over. I could look like an idiot come, a week from now, when we do our final review, but I'm sticking hard with the Wolfpack. I have no affiliation to the Wolfpack whatsoever, but it's honestly because I play golf for my school, and so it's golf and a lot of other sports. You just got to get hot at the right time. And NC State coming in and winning all 5 games in the ACC championship, and they hit that buzzer beater to go into overtime. I believe that was against Virginia in the ACC championship. Is just some of the shots and how they've played as a team in totality in the past 2 months has been exceptional basketball. So I think why not them? Why not have an 11 seed in the final? I just think they're there. They're here at the right time, and now is the time.
Do you have a final score prediction for that game?
Yeah, my final score prediction for the NC State Purdue game is going to be 79 NC State to 77 Purdue. I think it's going to be generally a low-scoring game. I think it's going to be defense-heavy. I wouldn't be surprised if Edey or Burns foul out, or if they both foul out. I think it's just going to be a dogfight.
I think I'm going to have to ride the wave with you, the Wolfpack. I want to say Purdue just because Edie's been so dominant, but I mean NC State, like you said, is hot at the right time. So I think we both agree NC State and UConn. That now moving on to that championship, if it were to happen, I personally think UConn just because I mean they've done it before. We've seen it. NC State's they didn't even know if they were going to make the actual March Madness. So I mean that would be a true David versus Goliath situation. I mean you never really want to bet against Goliath, but if that were the case, who would you have to go with? Because for me, it would be UConn.
Yeah, it's like Coach Jimmy V. If UConn and NC State play in the final, I mean, like you said, I mean, I want to go with UConn, but why? It's like why not? Why not NC State? Why not? They've won all these games, so like why not? Like, I mean, I'm gonna pick the Wolfpack at the crossroads we're at right now. Why not NC State? Why not the Wolfpack? I said, I could look like an idiot, but I want to see NC State win it all. So I'm going to go with NC State winning a dogfight, like when UConn beat with Kemba Walker and UConn beat who did they beat in the national championship? Did they beat Butler? Yeah. I think we're going to see a super low scoring game if that happens. I would predict the final score of NC State versus UConn to be like 68 NC State to like 65 UConn, like in the 60s for sure. Any like final thoughts or?
The Brotherhood Ballad is all in on the Wolfpack.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. They're winning it all. UConn's had their run, but it's time for DJ Burns to get his due.
It's time for the new Zach Randolph to insert his name into college basketball history. Etch his name. It's time.
And as our producer Brock said, we don't trust Canadians, so Purdue's losing.
All right. I've been Alex, and that's been Justin. Thank you for tuning into the Brotherhood Ballad.